Let me take you back to around 200, 300 years, and most of the people who are here from the military backgrounds would, recognize the name Clausewitz. And the most famous line, and probably the only line that most of us know is, "War is a continuation of politics by other means."
There was this idea of India that would flourish in the years ahead, notwithstanding predictions by several historians or several analysts from the West that suggested that India is too disparate a nation to remain together.
We must understand that in 1949, India did not have a border with China. China was some abstract country somewhere in the Pacific, facing the Pacific. And they simply were not on our radar until they annexed Xinjiang in 1949. And then immediately after that, they came in and took over Tibet.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have in house the CNC, and sir, may I request you to inaugurate the book on General Nanavati, along with AVM Arjun Subramaniam. And while you do that, sir, we'll play a video.
For his fourth book, sir?
Yeah.
And as always, in fact, while I have not read it from cover to cover, I browsed through it because I knew if I'm going to come in front of you, there's a risk that you might ask me some questions. But even that early glimpse through, and my flag lieutenant has read it cover to cover, he is thrilled about it, he's insisting I got to read it immediately after this, is enough to give the full strength and value as to why such books need to be written. Of course, M. Marshall Subramaniam is a past master at writing. He's a strategist himself, deep thinker, military thinker. But this is probably the first time he's got into biographies. And I wish that we see many more of this, not just from him, from many people in the audience, because this is one area of history, as was just being mentioned in the last panel, that we are deficient of. We tend to look upon history as a bland sequence or a narrative, bereft sometimes of the thought and the emotions, the context in which decisions were taken, the challenges that were faced. That can only be done when you look through the eyes of people who were there at that time. And the art of writing a biography or the art of writing history in that manner is something that we haven't yet fully developed amongst our writers. And I say that with all sense of respect to the many budding and actual authors over here. It's an area that we need to develop much, much more. Because looking through those eyes of each of the people who have been historical figures, part and parcel of history around us, till we understand the emotions, their decision dilemmas, the challenges they faced, the true learning value for the next generation cannot come up. So to that extent, M. Marshall Arjun Subramaniam, for the wonderful work that you have done, the path-breaking work into getting into military biographies, as I recollect, I think there's only about a dozen of them that I can recollect, is a fantastic job, and I wish that this will lead on and spur many more of you into producing wonderful such works and the inspiring ideas, lives, narratives, experiences that we'll gather through this will help each one of us deal with challenges in our own time. Thank you very much and congratulations to yourself.
The idea is to decongest the drab topics of international relations, geopolitics, history, which are considered drab, and make them exciting, make them learning. And probably all of us go back with things that are a little new for all of us. The idea of a moderator is to speak the least, and I'll try my best to do so. To set the context for the conversation going forward, let me take you back to around 200, 300 years, and most of the people who are here from the military backgrounds would, recognize the name Clausewitz. And the most famous line, and probably the only line that most of us know is, "War is a continuation of politics by other means." I let this line sink in while we also think about how do wars and battles shape history, and more importantly, how do these historical events shape the future and the present. So, without continuing anymore with my voice, let me start with Air Marshal Arjun Subramaniam. But let me ask you: you've written you've written two seminal books, and we saw the videos here, covering wars of India since independence, from 47 to today. Let me start the round by asking you, how do you think the early strife that India faced on independence, battle of in J&K 47-48, Pakistan reneging on its obligations, Maharaja of Kashmir creating enough flux for us to, almost be the last gasp response with first Sikh landing in Srinagar. How do you think that battle or war shaped India's response for the next 2 decades internationally and politically, and most importantly, militarily?
Thanks, Nikhil, for that question. And yeah, what one has to look at the kind of condition or the kind of situation that India faced immediately after independence. Number one, you had the onerous task of unifying the country with 500 plus princely states, a few of them being recalcitrant and reluctant to join the Indian Union. On the other hand, you had the horrors of partition. And on the third front, you had this incursion into transgression into Jammu and Kashmir and the attempt by Pakistan to take over the state of Jammu and Kashmir, despite the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir signing the instrument of accession to India, right? The Indian army or the Indian armed forces were engaged on multiple fronts. They were engaged in assisting the government in mitigating the horrors of partition. They were assisting in ensuring that the recalcitrant states of Junagadh and Hyderabad were literally coerced into joining the Indian Union. And finally, it was to throw the Pakistanis out of Jammu and Kashmir. And the success of the Indian state in achieving all the three aspects that I mentioned, which means to say, ensuring that the state of Jammu and Kashmir, albeit some portions being cut off as Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, ensuring the accession of Hyderabad and Junagadh, and thereafter smoothing out the horrors of partition. I think that to a very large extent gave a lot of confidence to India's founding fathers to say that the Indian nation state is not in danger of, its survival was not in danger. That there was this idea of India that would flourish in the years ahead, notwithstanding predictions by several historians or several analysts from the West that suggested that India is too disparate a nation to remain together. I mean to say, the word balkanization did not come up at that particular time, but what they suggested was that the diversity of India would lead to its balkanization. That did not happen. And that, to my mind, is to a large extent was due to a lot of military action that took place during the early years. And in that sense, I think India's armed forces have been a custodian of the idea of India being preserved from that particular time.
Thank you so much, sir, for setting the stage for the next part of the conversation. I'll leave two nuggets with the audience here. emphasizing the points of how battles shape national politics going forward. The first one is, if you see this, go 200 years back, Panipat, Plassey, and Buxar happened very close to each other, and they influenced the history of India for next 200 years. But for losses in these battles, probably the British cementing their foothold in India would not have happened. Going forward from 1947, let's speak to Mr. Shiv Kunal Verma. You have written about 1962. 1962 was a debacle. It was a decisive defeat. And the good part is that as Indians and Indian military, we do not make bones of the time that we lost, but we learn from it and go forward. The question would be that what was the effect of that on the national psyche? And how did the policy making of Indians after 1962 change, primarily in the way India handled its external affairs and also the way military got shaped post 1962?
Thank you, Nikhil, and it's a pleasure to be here in Bombay. 1962, let's not make any bones about it. As you said, it was an unmitigated disaster. But to understand what happened in 1962, you simply have to go back to 1949, immediately after the period where Air Marshal Subramaniam just talked about what happened in 47-48 in Kashmir. We must understand that in 1949, India did not have a border with China. China was some abstract country somewhere in the Pacific, facing the Pacific. And they simply were not on our radar until they annexed Xinjiang in 1949. And then immediately after that, they came in and took over Tibet. They called it, whatever the nomenclature, the fact is they took over. When they came into Xinjiang, we suddenly had 1,500-kilometer border with them, which was J&K, which was also a princely state. Let's not forget that, which had its own problems. In fact, we just finished fighting over it with Kashmir, with Pakistan. And after they took over Tibet, we suddenly had a 4,000-kilometer long border. Sardar Patel, the Home Minister at that time, wrote a very incredibly strong and very perceptive note on this entire thing, where he appreciated what is going to happen. And that, everybody says, like if Sardar Patel had survived, maybe things would have been different. But what we forget is that there were actually three that set into motion, even though that letter was written 17 days before he died. It set into motion certain things which are even today top secret. We had the Himmat Singh Ji committee and the Kulwant Singh committee reports, which are still classified. Kulwant Singh in 1953 or 54, that report categorically stated that 9 years from now, there will be a border clash with China. And similarly, the Himmat Singh committee report basically dealt with the Assam Rifles and the NIFA sector, where they decided where the real forward policy was first decided. There's a lot of criticism about all that, which I feel is slightly unfounded, and I've argued accordingly in the book. But what led to an absolute disaster in 62 was political interference in the hierarchy of the army and stuff like that. Because after General Thimaya, it was widely expected that General Thorat would become the chief. And he had held this amazing exercise in 1961, in March, in Lucknow, where everybody was present except for Nehru, where he had actually suggested fighting the Chinese from a defensive line, which was halfway down, which was just 25 nautical miles from the plains of this thing, from Assam, where he felt that we could hold the Chinese, let them come in, let the Assam Rifles harass them, etc. And this was an incredible piece of work, Lal Killa, because he actually predicted the dates of the attack. In fact, my 62 book starts virtually with that, because my father was into Rajput. They were in Wolong. He was one of the he was the LO for the general when he had come, along with Dashrath Singh, who was the JCO LO. And the 62 book, the seeds were sown when my dad and Dashrath Singh were discussing. And Dashrath Singh asked my dad, he said, "Aapko yaad hai saab, jab wo general saab aaye the, unhone to humko taarikh tak bata di thi. Phir bhi sab kuch galat ho gaya." How did it impact the Indian psyche after? Firstly, it was not a war. Let's be very clear about it. We've had 3 days of actual fighting with the Chinese at Namkachu, at Bumla on the 23rd of October, and on the 17th they have attacked in Sela. There was fighting in Wolong, and there was fighting in Ladakh. Not more than a division is actually involved if you actually take the entire thing and you total that up. I think it would take the 65 war for us to get off the mat. We were pretty badly hammered, and in the 65 book, in the preface, I've actually talked about the fact that 65 is really a continuation of what happened in 62. But it's to India's immense credit that we got up, we dusted ourselves, and we got on with it. And in 65, we managed to turn things around in a very different way, for which, again, there is a lot of naval presence here. A lot of people believe that the Navy had very little to do with the 1965, but in my book, I've argued that the war actually started because of the Navy and the exercise which was held off the Kathiawar coast. We'll come to that later.
Thanks so much. And but I have a follow-up question for you, and this is a little controversial. Wherever we go, and you mentioned that yourself, that there was political interference in the military appointments, postings, which impacted the outcome of the war and the behavior of certain senior officers in the conflict. What is your view on that? Was it political interference that shaped the war, or that led to the complete rout of Indian Army there, or was it just pure, as I would put it really bluntly, incompetence?
Well, actually, the officer we are talking about is General Kaul, BG Kaul, and right from the moment he joined the army, he was the last King's Commission officer. And Motilal Nehru at that time had written a letter to the British saying that he should not be exposed to any frontline fighting, which in World War II he was then given all kinds. He initially went into the Rajrif, they moved him to ASC. In 1947, it's not very well known, but he was the MA in Washington DC. He was brought back, and Nehru appointed him as the person who was sort of dealing with Sheikh Abdullah and J&K. So they were related, and after that he made him the QMD, etc. Interestingly, when he commanded 4 division in Ambala, he commanded 11 Corps, and he was also in Korea, and his chain of command and the reporting was always Timaya and Thorat, Timaya and Thorat, Timaya and Thorat. And at every stage, from brigadier to, and he got into trouble at various stages, they have constantly said, this officer is not fit for further promotion. But Nehru had different ideas. He brought him up. And on the other level, even at Namkachu, when the first thing started on 10th of October, when the attack was, when 9 Punjab started advancing and the Chinese started firing, it's to Kaul's credit that he came back to Delhi and he admitted he was wrong. But unfortunately, and he asked Nehru, he said, I want to withdraw. I want to pull back towards Hatungla and at least you have a fighting chance. But at that time, Bogey Sen and Thapar, who had been sort of superseded by this guy. Bogey Sen, as the army commander, received him and a new corps had been commanded. I mean, you going there to receive your junior officer, unheard of. So these guys are carrying that baggage. And they said, now you bloody well fight. But you see, there were other aspects to Kaul also, which were actually, every human being, as I say, is as I argue, is 10% white, 10% black, and 80% grey. You want to really look for only at that 10% black, then you can paint him whichever way you want. Or if you only want to look at the white part. But the truth always lies somewhere in between. He had a lot of very good qualities also, Kaul, but he was entirely a political appointment, period. And that's what led to the disaster. Junior leadership in 62 was fantastic. It was actually very good.
Thanks, Shiv. But the only disclaimer is if you speak too much about shades of grey, people out here will have a completely different understanding of subject. Going to Colonel Sam now, and keeping in view the general age of the audience here, the younger age profile, I'll bring you slightly to the last sort of large war that India fought. And let's talk about Kargil 99, probably the first war which was fought and seen in the drawing rooms on television. And you were a tech entrepreneur yourself, and you were in service at that time. How do you think Kargil has shaped the national psyche since 99?
So firstly, thank you for getting me between these two stalwarts. And there I can see a lot of authors in the audience. I can see Ajay sir, I can see Prabal, I can see. So I actually feel, and in South Mumbai, very close to Wankhede Stadium, I feel like a rookie opening batsman who is teaching Rohit Sharma or Shubman Gill or Tendulkar how to open an innings.
I'm at the other end, sir.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. And I was hoping you will not ask me about Kargil. That's the only war that I was not a part of, because I was doing my staff course with Admiral S.J. Singh. We were together. We were busy defending India, then a third world country. We were like the rogue nation in the world, which had just gone nuclear. The guy who was to go to staff course before us, his kind of staff course nomination, everything was cancelled. He was the guy from Australia was thrown back. So we were actually busy there. And one day, actually, so just two more things. I'll just go back, divert a little bit before I come to Kargil, and I'll really keep it brief to less than 2 minutes. So one day, SJ actually came to me, and he says, Sam, all three Pakis have got unka chappal mein hai. And I said, yeah, military officers, don't move around in chappals, and that too in England and all. Kuch hua hai. And then we kind of surely we saw, and then we got a call from embassy. There was a coup in Pakistan for sure. So a lot of interesting things were happening around that time. Just one more thing on Kargil, because this is an audience of a lot of Navy people and all. Admiral S.J. Singh was the first officer to get the best student on staff college, being from India. So a big round of applause in absentia. I would have loved to take him. I did tell him that I will take his name, and he said, good that I'm not there, Okay, so my impressions of Kargil war, seeing from far, I think the most lasting impression is young Captain Vikram Batra standing atop a peak in the Kargil sector and saying, what did he say? Ye dil mange more. So I think Vikram made this supreme sacrifice, leading the next assault, and the nation remains grateful to him and all the people who made this supreme sacrifice. I commanded a unit with lots of battle and theater honors. So again, these are all very emotional moments. Soldier in you never leaves you. I left about 17 years back after commanding a unit. But I think once the stories of battle and then everything, right from 71 war of my unit, Chicken's Neck, and everything kind of starts going back in your head as a professional soldier. So just coming to Kargil now, to your exact question, I think there were, I'll take it in 2-3 parts. One was the immediate thing, which was the psyche of the nation, first televised war, Ye Dil Mange More, and the morale. The second is that we did a lot of improvisations on the battlefield, from Air Force, and we did to UAVs, they were used for the first time, to a lot of improvisation on communications, logistics, so we were a little caught. And we learned a lot of lessons. There was a role of Navy which has often been downplayed, so I would want one of you to actually take up this and write the role of Navy in Kargil war. I've had talks with a lot of naval officers, Commodore Shrikant Keshnur especially. He feels the role of Navy has been underplayed during the Kargil conflict, because they did an amazing job. I think the biggest role of Kargil has been the lessons that we learned from Kargil. And then thereafter, some of it has been implemented in terms of integration. I mean, we are moving towards theater commands, the creation of the CDS, and there's a whole lot of, it's all in the public domain, so I don't want to go into it. You can read that. And there is also a book, Men of Steel. So essentially, there were a lot of people who were bought in, and General Mohinder Puri has written a chapter on that, and there are a few other chapters. So you could read that book, Men of Steel. I was invited to write a chapter on transition from military, and how do you kind of, from a military colonel, become an entrepreneur. So thank you. So long answer to your short question without answering the question, because I wasn't there. There are a lot of people in the Kargil war who would be better placed to answer that question.
You said it, so I didn't. But going forward, and my question now would be to AVM. So 71 was a seminal moment in the history of, if for the lack of a better word, South Asia. I know people don't appreciate this subcontinent being called South Asia. And the political geography of this area changed. However, we notice, and we suffer to this day, certain short-sightedness post the war, especially in terms of the territorial alignment that the nation faces today. In the current context, we see that Bangladesh has turned a table. The political dispensation there is quite antagonistic to India as such. Could this have been prevented by better political machinations, or towards aligning the Indian boundary with Bangladesh post 71?
So I don't really know whether anything different could have been done when it comes to aligning the political boundaries with Bangladesh. But I certainly know that we could have progressed significantly on Kashmir had the Shimla agreement been negotiated in a better manner by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. So let me dwell a little bit more on this. So 1971 has been one of the few wars of choice that India has fought. For most of the time, India's wars have been wars of necessity. 1971 was one war of choice that we acted proactively, not really proactively, we acted in response to the refugee crisis. But the final act of creating Bangladesh was a choice that we took proactively. But where we lost a little bit of ground after 1971 was during the Shimla Agreement, when we lost the opportunity to trade territory for 93,000 prisoners. Instead, what happened was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's famous dialogue to Indira Gandhi, Bharosa Rakhiye, madam, which means to say that Prime Minister Bhutto assured Prime Minister Indira Gandhi that if at that moment in time during the Shimla Agreement you don't push me to negotiate further on Kashmir, I will lose my job as the Prime Minister of Pakistan. There will be another coup. Please return the prisoners, and we will continue our negotiations, and I will assure you that we will resolve the problem of Kashmir. That problem of Kashmir was never resolved. So while 1971 had many, many positives, this is one area wherein I think we lost out an opportunity to redraw boundaries. When I say redrawing boundaries with Pakistan, more explicitly, I mean to say to ensure that that the current line of control was reconfigured in such a manner that all or major parts of Pakistan occupied Kashmir could have been negotiated, put on the table for the return of those 93,000 prisoners. That's my assessment as a historian.
And so going forward or going backwards towards 1965 again now, and we alluded to that in our previous conversation. 65 was a very strange war, very, very strange. Primarily because when you read 65 from a Pakistani lens, they claim victory and they consider India to be the aggressor. When you read it from the Indian lens, India claims victory and it considers Pakistan to be the aggressor. So as a historian, Shiv, what do you think is the real truth? How did it start and how did it end? And most importantly, what were those key areas that we improved on post 1965 that helped us gain seminal victory in 1971?
Before I answer that, I'll just take a leaf out of your question to Sam, sir. I actually saw Bikram Batra being killed. I was in a helicopter above the post when we saw the Airbus which took him out. We didn't know, of course, at that moment that he had died. The only thing I want to add about Kargil, because I made the movie which was later then shown to Bill Clinton also. After having written, I hadn't written the 62 book at that stage, but in Kargil, it doesn't matter what color of uniform, green, blue, whatever, every guy was moving forward. Every man was doing his duty. There's not a single person whose footsteps were faltering. And I will include in that truck drivers, the cleaners, the porters. Every chap felt he was doing something. And the only thing that mattered was the tricolor. Pakistan's claims on 1965. Well, Pakistan's been claiming all kinds of things from, right from its very inception. Pakistan was created for a completely different reason. I have actually put out a few facts about that in my Long Road to Siachen, where I've actually spelled out that it was created for British interests in 1919, etc. Pakistan's claims in 1965 just do not hold water. There's just no way. In the run of Kutch, they started the entire thing in response to the naval exercise which I earlier referred to. We had taken Vikrant there. We were flying Alizés and Seahawks over the run of Kutch. And these guys have actually thought that India is on the, trying to recover politically from 62. And also 50 independent para brigade was the designated thing for that area. The Pakistanis probably presumed that we were planning to do an amphibious assault around Karachi. And they went into the run of Kutch more as a spoiling action. Of course, this is speculation because you can never be absolutely sure. In the run of Kutch, they were absolutely certain that they would have it would be like a knife going through butter. When I started the 65 book, that's where I first went and saw the terrain, etc. And it's impossible. That area is impossible. We're sitting in a swamp. In the Ran of Kutch, they claim that it's a maritime area, and therefore that maritime laws should apply, and they should have half of it. I have argued that give it to them, yeah. Let them have the problems that we have otherwise. Why are we trying to hold 100 kilometers and fight them on high ground in Sindh and everything? Yet when they attacked, there was a CRPF post. Now again, BSF was created in 65, but these boys have not been given their due. We have a lot to learn from them, but unfortunately, we have all kinds of turf wars, and there's not enough interaction. The CRPF post known as Sadr Post, stood their ground. They didn't run, and they fought, and they stopped a brigade strength attack on their post. And I think the CRPF were fantastic. It set the tone. Harold Wilson got involved. Then there was that business about Operation Ablaze, where we started planning everything. And then we did a little bit of proactive work in Kargil, where we took a few posts, which we later returned to them when the deal was signed on the Ran of Kutch. But then they launched Operation Gibraltar. Now, Gibraltar was one hell of an operation because they sent in, well, Indian authors have been claiming that they sent in forces close to 30,000, but in my book I have argued that seems highly improbable. It was closer to around 12,000, maybe 10 to 12,000, and that because even holding a logistic force of that size is not possible. Gibraltar was stopped with just sheer grit and one man's amazing ability to think positive when the chips were down. General Harbakh Singh decided to go not only for Hajipir, but he also went for the Kishanganga Bulge. He cut them off. एक बारी दरवाजा उनके पीछे बंद हो जाता है. No force will be able to. He is always looking over his shoulder. They were defeated the moment we took Hajipir. But that triggered off Grand Slam. Because they then came into the Akhnur area. Again, the Indian Army, there were 2 or 3 battalions. There was the Punjab Armed Police, which were holding the international border. They went through those guys initially with a lot of elan, because there were 2 pattern regiments. There was 20th Lancers. There was just a squadron. There was Major Bhaskar Roy, who was that time, I think, he got an MVC for that. And it was AMX tanks against these guys. The brigade commander had been killed in the shelling. There was a new person who had come in, Mohinder Singh, and these guys did a fantastic job, but we lost ground over there, etc. And here is where Shastri really kicks in as one of the greatest prime ministers we've ever had, because he decided that why are we limiting the fighting to Kashmir? Let's go across in Punjab, let's go across in Rajasthan, let's go across in Gujarat. Let's put the screws on them, and let's see what happens. Now, Pakistan uses that to say that we were the aggressors, but they've forgotten about Gibraltar, they've forgotten about Ran of Kutch, they've forgotten about all that. And if they're calling it a draw, I'm sorry, there was something seriously psychologically wrong with them. They were on the mat. And if General Chaudhary had not given Shastri the wrong impression on the ammunition, state of ammunition, where he claimed we were running out of ammunition, we had expended 13%. Pakistan had 13% left. We would have destroyed their war-making capacity at that point of time, which Shastri wanted to do. He asked him that. And had General Chaudhary not made that mistake, I think 3 million Bengalis may not have lost their lives later. It's ironical that General Chaudhary himself was a Bengali. But, the fact is that they continued, and, 6 years later, they unleashed whatever they did in Bangladesh, and we had all that problem. So that's the irony of the whole thing. But if Pakistan says it was a draw, well, in some cases, like in the case of the Air Force, we lost 75 aircraft. They lost 22. But in air-to-air combat, it was those 22 were all knocked down in air-to-air. Our ground dispersals, everything were a disaster. In Pathankot, in Kalaikunda, we've lost aircraft like that. But you have to see it in the overall context. And I think 65, we had achieved all our objectives. They had achieved none. So, क्या बात कर रहे हैं मुझे तो पता नहीं.
Can I just add, because again, that's the... So, either side of 65 war. So, I'll go to 1956. Since you said Ran of Kutch, my unit, then a Camel battalion, actually captured Chhatbet, and that's where we earned our first Ashok Chakra, Havaldar Murli Ram. So, maybe you would like to do a bit of...
The first casualties were 3 camels from your battalion in the 1965 war. Yes. And I've always held we must have a memorial for our mules, our yaks, which performed superbly in 62 in the Galwan area, etc., and even camels and stuff, because we really need to honor them.
And again, that was returned to Pakistan. In 71 war, my unit captured Chicken Neck. 1 year my unit was in Chicken Neck. After 72, it was again given back. So maybe this is a good piece of history where both of you would like to do. I'm happy to join in if you want to do some research on that. So, but I'll leave that to you, for the next question, please.
Moral of the story is don't get his unit involved. Wapis karna padega.
Yeah, sometimes it can be really tough on you. Twice you capture, you get victories for the country, and it's given back in negotiations. Yeah.
We've heard the camel's back, the chicken neck, and the next thing will be a goat's leg. But a follow-up on that, since we are doing speculative history here, Shiv, you mentioned that agar wo nahi hota, to Bangladesh nahi hota. But you also mentioned about Prime Minister Shastri being there. And he went to Tashkent and unfortunately he died there. So speculatively, what would have happened if he would have come back having negotiated a peace treaty which was not palatable internally and externally? How do you think would have been his reception back in India, especially in the political circles?
When I was researching for the 65 war, I came to Bombay and I met Mr. Pradhan, who was Mr. Chavan's PS. I had lunch with him in Copper Chimney. It was a fantastic lunch. And he had the room next to Prime Minister Shastri in Tashkent that night. And he was perhaps one of the last people to have actually met him. He was later the governor of Arunachal Pradesh also. And he told me, he says, Shastri ji was very clear. He says, I'm going to have to sign this, but I cannot go back to India alive. He actually said it to him. He said, well, मैं किस मुंह से वापस जाऊंगा? क्योंकि he was, even when we say politicians weren't aware, they gave away whatever, we are also not really aware of the entire background history in many occasions.
There's one point here, Shiv, if I can add to what you just now said. So, I think that's something that we've changed in recent times. And let me go back to 1971. General Bhagat and the others were in charge of the redrawing of the AGPL to the LC. Now, when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi went to Shimla to do the agreement, there was no senior military officer in her team to negotiate.
True,
right?
sir.
It was only DP Dhar and PN Dhar.
Correct.
Right? Similarly, when Shastriji went to Tashkent, there was no senior military officer accompanying her in order to assist in negotiating military gains on the table. Right? Fast forward to Galwan. After Galwan happened, almost every negotiation for almost 13 rounds with the Chinese has included the corps commander of 15 Corps or a senior military officer, including an Air Force officer.
14 Corps, you mean?
14 Corps, yeah, 14 Corps. And I think that has contributed significantly to an improvement in civil-military relations and the propensity not to give away territorial gains on the political table. So that's just my...
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. But when you said, when you're talking about 71, I'll just take you back. I also did the book on Assam Rifles, and I was once playing golf with General Karan Yadav, who was the DG Assam Rifles at that time. His father had been wounded in that Dalai operation. In fact, my dad commanded 18 Rajput during the 71 war. So anyway, I told him, I said, sir, you're the DG. I'm doing the Assam Rifles book. Let's dig out all the old files and let's see what there is. Hua kya? I mean, we have access. So he was a very laid back sort of a person. And he said, Kunal, kya fayda? He said, humko mote facts to malum hai. Even if we get the details, it's all right. But remember one thing, and especially as a military historian, I've always kept that in mind. So whatever we now know with hindsight, it's fine. But we don't know the circumstances around which those decisions were taken. That will never be put on file. No? So we sometimes have to be a little bit more circumspect when we are passing judgment.
So let's move forward. I think we've spoken about 65, 71, 99. Colonel Sam, my question to you is that while military actions have a direct impact on history, politics, but what are their impacts which are softer ones on society? There is, and we had this conversation before, that the universal suffrage or allowing women to vote or everybody getting a voting right is something to do with what happened in World War One or World War Two.
As it is, I know a little bit. If you speak everything, nothing will be left for me. So I'll take probably three.
Absolutely, sir. And
I'll
this
take-
you will be on point.
No, I'll probably take three revolutions. Let me take three revolutions. Okay. So let's take Industrial Revolution, French and American Revolution, and World War.
All
I think
yours.
these are three big events. So we can take the learnings from that. First, Industrial Revolution did is it upsized the war. Earlier it used to be a small war. Now why wars were small? Because if soldiers would be deployed, who will give them food? Army marches on its belly, Shiv Kumar Verma writes. So who will feed them? But when you got these, when you had this Industrial Revolution, you could now produce weapons and equipment at scale. You also had a lot of these modes of transportation, from steam shipping to railways and, automobiles and all. And they could take you literally to, they could sustain those forces in the field. They could carry the weapons, ammunition and food. So the war got much upsized, and obviously its destructive effect became much more pronounced. The second bit, let me take the French and American Revolution, what they did. Before that, there were these strong monarchs. And why did you have monarchs and kings? Because the state had to mobilize a lot of resources. So you needed a strong center, whether in Russia or in France or America, because they had to mobilize these resources for fighting. And whosoever contributed to the war fight was actually given their due. And women were not contributing, that's why they were not given their due that time in war fighting. So what happened in French and American Revolution? After that, earlier you were subjects, now you became citizens. Earlier, orders used to come from top and you just implement. Now you are a guy who you can throw out the government, you elect the government. So you have a duty also to protect. So you became a stakeholder. And then this spirit of nationalism came in. Now, while Industrial Revolution made sure that the troops could be maintained in the field, it is nationalism that kept them in high morale. So if you look at World War, by the time World War I we came to 1914 to 17, even third year before Russian Revolution, people were still fighting with on both sides, with a lot of nationalism. So it was nationalism that is something beyond me, something which came before me, which will outlast me even if I die. So that is what actually kept people in the battlefield highly motivated. And third one, which you were alluding to, what happened in World War, all the men, women, and women didn't have voting rights then because they were not contributing to war effort. So that's my kind of... so once all the men went, then you had to do some work. Somebody had to do their work. So women came into workforce. Pehle they were told, no, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't drive a tractor, you can't do this. Now they started doing everything and they started doing it quite well. So after the war, everybody decided, look, women have also contributed to war effort. So have the common citizens, who were the kind of lower rung of the society. So they were all given voting rights. So that's how again, once war happens, after that you will find a lot of these, Washington gets named after General Washington. You have all these streets named, you have Vikram Vihar, you have, Manekshaw Marg. So you have all these namings of this thing. You have the whole societies which get changed. Germany, Japan completely got changed after the war. Imagine what if Axis powers had won the war. Imagine if Ottoman Empire had won the war, then it would be Vienna and Bratislava and all would be Islamic countries now.
And we would be speaking Turkish.
Yeah. So, the impact is tremendous, and I'm sure more people can add to that.
His fourth thing he forgot was the futuristic thing where it will be completely women dominated and given their efficiency, and you will have reservation for men in the armed forces.
Okay. So just to, I was asked one question because somebody asked me when I was giving them the story. They asked, look, if you make women, there will be no fights. So I gave them from history. Catherine the Great, yeah, good. Thank you, I agree with you. So Catherine the Great, Golda Meir, Maggie Thatcher, Indira Gandhi, they all had, and they led their countries to war very successfully. So I think once they get into positions of authority, they are as good or bad. And in COVID particularly, they did very well. So every country that was led by women, I think they did very well, from New Zealand to all the European countries. So a big round of applause to the women leaders.
Thank you so much, sir. I knew this was coming, so I'm wearing pink. But before we end, and we'll make this interesting, this is a question I haven't told the panelists. So we can go in any sequence. I think we can start with you, Shiv. Which is one personality, a military personality, who has shaped the psyche and the imagination and the thoughts of this Indian nation post 1947 the most, and probably been recognized the least? I'm taking away Sam Manekshaw, I'm taking away Vikram Batra, and I'm also giving you a gist of what's going to come tomorrow, that Vikram Batra's CEO in 1999 is going to be with us. So we are taking away General Y.K. Joshi also. So you take away these three, and probably you can tell us, who do you think has been least recognized, least revered, least known? So we can go with you, Shiv, first.
Well, I've now been bullied, I can only use that word, by General Thorat's son to now write his biography, which I hope will be half as good as yours, sir, because I've just spent time with General Nanavati. Tanay and I were with him in Dehradun. And he's one hell of a guy. He was a student in Staff College when my dad was a DS. And I can tell you a few stories as well. General Thorat is probably one of the key figures which I would actually look at, not because I'm going to write his biography, but otherwise also. Because Lal Killa, which we've talked about earlier, was actually a masterclass in an appreciation as to what can happen, how it will happen, and what actually played itself out. I would rate him as one of the biggest commanders, but there's also another officer who has shaped and influenced a lot of officers, and that was Ronnie Pereira in the Navy. When he was the commandant of NDA, he was absolutely outstanding. And anybody who has been through that period talk about him almost in such revered terms. It's incredible. I only met him after he had retired. He'd come on Lamreta and he was busy dancing the whole night in the ADC's cottage. He was one of those characters. My dad also served with him in the cabinet secretariat, and he also used to say something quite outstanding. So perhaps these two officers, in my understanding, I would rate General Thorat in the army, Ronnie Pereira as a naval, one of the most outstanding people we've had. And in the Air Force, there are a few, but let's leave that for another day.
Thank you so much, sir. And my only question on this is, if the NDA commandant was in the ADC's room, ADC kahan tha?
ADC bhi wahi tha. He was, an amazing person. He was a great personality. After he retired, he used to drive a scooter. And who would believe he had been the naval chief? And in fact, when there was that whole move to get rid of his predecessor, he refused. He said, Mrs. Gandhi offered him the chief's position, and he said, no, I'm not going to do it.
Thank you so much. Sam, sir, I think you're raring to go.
Yeah. K. Sundarji. And why is he called Sundarji and not Sundar? Somebody else can answer that. Prabal, would you like to answer that?
Well, I'm currently working on the book, so you'll have to wait for the answer.
Okay.
No spoilers.
So thank you. So I'll leave it at that. So I will not tell anything about Sundarji. Why? So
There is a reason. So, there are so many other things in the book, but since you've asked me the question, so when he was little, so this is called a teaser so that you read the book.
No, and so that you attend next year's
So
edition
that
of
you come
Psyche.
here again. So, Nikhil, take a minute. He would attend school and he'd come back. And he asked this question that there is Nehruji, there is Gandhiji, and he was called Sundar. So he named himself Sundarji. That's how, and I spoke with his niece, who you might have heard of, and you might have read too, Aruna Roy. She's an activist, very well known. And several other people and his wife has also documented this little anecdote about how he became Sundarji. He was Sundar, that was his name, and Sundar Subramaniam.
So I have had the privilege of, I was commissioned when he was the colonel of the regiment. So I have had the privilege of spending a lot of time. He used to love spending time with young officers. So great stories. I can maybe give you some, and people of my generation.
Thank you, Prabalji and Samji. Okay. Arjun sir,
Yeah.
you can go next.
Arjun Ji.
Two military figures whom I consider very, very important for our contemporary Indian military. First is Lieutenant General Sagat Singh. Sagat Singh was the architect. Sagat Singh was not only the architect of the 1971 advance towards Dhaka, but he's also the central protagonist of Probal's first book, which is Watershed 1967. He was the divisional commander over there, and had it not been for Sagat, we wouldn't have conducted offensive artillery operations against the Chinese. And the second figure I mention very carefully, because the icon as far as the Indian Air Force is concerned is Marshal of the Air Force Arjun Singh. But I would regard Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal as the architect of the modern Indian Air Force. Because it is P.C. Lal who was the Chief of the Air Staff during the 1971 war. and it is he's the one who paved the way for the modern Indian Air Force. Thank you.
If you haven't read P.C. Lal's book, you must, because it's really very,
My
very
years with
good.
the Indian Air
Yes.
Force. That
Fantastic.
again is essential reading for those of you who want to understand the growth and birth of the Indian Air Force.
It was finished by his wife after he died, and it's a brilliant book.
I think we are just out of time, but we'll take a couple of questions. I think there's a gentleman to our left.
Great insights, but there are two very famous names which could be included. There are Harbaksh, who saved Srinagar for us. Shah Singh was won by him as a lieutenant colonel. The other, he was a man who saved us in 65 because he refused to withdraw beyond the Bias River and fought them at Kemkar and Asalokar. He is the man who has been given his due. The other name that comes readily to mind is Himaya. He was using him a chief. But his actions as Zotila had actually shaped the contours of Kashmir as we know it today.
Thank you so much.
We spoke about strategic blunders that we had done in the past. So I just wanted to ask a question, because it has been reported during the Galwan crisis that we once occupied the Kailash heights and we eventually gave it away or whatever the thing was. So was that a blunder of coming down from the Kailash heights, and if we were still there, we could have negotiated better with the Chinese?
So I think the simple answer to your question is you have to go to the Kailash heights to see whether it can be occupied and sustained throughout the year, right? So the occupation of the Kailash heights was a strategic plus point. It was a master stroke. But vacating it was a necessity. Otherwise, survival may have been difficult on those heights throughout the year, right? So that's my understanding of the situation.
I think that's oversimplification. I think we did quite well. So again, we are privy to some privileged information which we'll not like to share here. But yeah, I think we did quite well, both in terms of how we reached here, how we did the information warfare around it, and how we negotiated post that. I mean, why do you think Chinese went back from all the fingers?
We also held the Kailash Heights in 62. You know, we had that Spangur Gap, and we had Gorkha Hill on one side, and then the Rezangla and all that. And you got to understand the terrain, as ABM Arjun Subramaniam is saying, because from their side it's actually quite a easy approach, you know, from the Spangur Lake side. Hamari side say it's very difficult to hold that area.
Any other question, please? Yes, please.
A lot of youngsters are sitting here and we look towards the future. So how do you think the future wars would be fought, and how is India prepared? Because India is more often looked as a reactive nation in terms of responding. But the future, like we have just seen how Israel did what they did, like this.
Understood. Take 30 seconds. Okay. So very quickly, throughout history, you will have, and you're a technologist, you're a tech entrepreneur, am I right? Yeah. So throughout history, technology has always impacted warfare. You take Babur's artillery, you take any throughout history, you know, Yom Kippur War, to any war throughout history. So now if you look at, you know, when tanks came in, aircrafts came in, submarines came in, that tilted the scales in the favor of the size which had technology. Now if you look at it, the latest wars, I think 3 big trends are coming in. One is the drones, the swarm of drones. 2 is the impact of AI, and 3rd is strategic communications. So all 3 will combine in very dangerous ways. And probably the role of autonomous platforms will keep increasing. The role of humans will keep decreasing in that battlefield. The battlefield may itself become too dangerous, the front line for human beings. So that's the very briefly that I see. So 30 seconds.
Thank you so much, sir.